Hello YouTube, this is Boston Best 0407, and for my next video I thought about what I would discuss, and I considered making an addendum to my last or second to last video, which was a response to Rocky Mr. E about the political spectrum. And I thought about it, and I decided that I pretty much, you know, I ran my points home. I made all my points known. I spent an hour talking about it. I cited sources. Therefore, there was no reason to go back to that. There was nothing else I really had to say, and wasting any more time on it wouldn't be productive because obviously he's a bigger YouTuber than I am, and he didn't accept my response. So that's it. The end of that. And after thinking about it, I thought that I would discuss something that has been on my mind for a while, and it goes back to the very first YouTube video I did, which I discussed the possibility or the desire I had to do men's rights videos. But I pointed out from the very beginning that I myself was traditional and conservative in my attitudes on a lot of issues, even these issues. But then I backtracked and I felt I didn't want to associate the movie. What I basically meant was that I personally was traditional and conservative, but that I didn't want to, I felt I could suspend that for the good of the movement and for the progress of the movement. Now, I wasn't as hardened in my feelings on that as I am now. I needed some time to think about it, and as I thought about it more, I became more hardened in it. And I even thought of doing a video where I said why I support both the MRM and MGTOW, but why I'm neither. I never did that video. But all of this has become relevant again because recently the men's rights movement decided to change their name to from MRM to MHRM, Men's Human Rights Movement. And as I thought about a lot of different issues, I came to a much more pessimistic conclusion than most people. I really realized that at its core, the entire problem at its core is that we, as a society, as Western civilization, have pretty much since the Renaissance embraced the concept of social progress and social change as an inherent and intrinsic good. We all do it, even right-wingers do it. People who claim they're conservative do it. This is how, you can have like Tea Partiers and people like that talking about a conservative change, a conservative revolution even, which is an inherent contradiction. It doesn't even make any sense. Conservatism means a rejection of social change at its core. And so, the reason all of this, of course, is relevant to the issue of the men's rights movement is that the men's rights movement, by embracing, or rather by putting the H in their name, human rights, have basically painted themselves, or rather they are making the statement that they want to be another one of these liberal progressive movements. They want to fight for the progress and good of men. And it's flawed. It's horribly flawed. The reason it's horribly flawed is, one, and this is really probably for, because people who are obviously intent on thinking this way won't think any differently. Therefore, if you are a progressive member of the men's rights movement, and I'm saying in temperament, I'm not even saying in politics, you will think this way anyway. But even within that, when you describe yourself as men's human rights movement, you have a problem because your political enemies, feminists, left-wingers, whoever, will always think you are essentially a bunch of misogynists. You would never be able to convince these people that you're anything other than a bunch of misogynists. And as I discussed in my last video, I got called a white supremacist by association. by a YouTuber who I'm seriously convinced is a National Socialist herself, but nevertheless accused me of being a white supremacist by association because I supported the men's rights movement in my videos. Not that anyone watched them, but that's a different story. This reflects an inherent reality of discussing men's issues, is that you will always be seen to be on the far right, no matter what. There's nothing you can do about that. And this is why, for example, it was so important from the very beginning that the movement remained apolitical. And this is what people like Bernard Chapin and Rocking Mr. E never really understood. And I wasn't really making YouTube videos when that debate was going on. But you really on some level don't want the baggage of right-wing politics associated with your cause of men. We're arguing for the cause of men, because you will be associated from the get-go with white supremacy, neo-Nazism, social conservatism, religious fundamentalism, the whole damn thing. You can even have somebody like, the fact that some of the key players in the movement, Paul Elam, Go Writes What is it, John the Other, and then the whole Atheism Plus thing, which I followed a little bit, that means the core members of this movement are themselves atheists, but you have somebody like Hannibal the Victor who says in one of his videos that he probably thinks that the movement is a bunch of Christian fundamentalists. You can have people thinking that. Means that you never get anywhere trying to you just will always be considered to be far right, even when you're not, because these people at their core they won't even look at it. They won't even look at you having even any meaningful arguments. Therefore, why give them any more fire? Why, for example, would you try to make it a right-wing movement? Even if it's a right-wing libertarian movement, why would you do that? Because the whole spectrum of baggage associated with right-wing politics, even if it's not true, which is really the point, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. You're always going to have that baggage associated with you by your political enemies. Why give them a fire? Why give them the fire? You want to keep the movement apolitical, but in doing so, all of a sudden now you don't want to take either position. You don't want to be progressive because you're never going to get there. You're never going to have alliances with the left. You're never going to be able to build alliances with the left because the left is already intent on hating you. They already believe you're part of the patriarchy and that you're a patriarchal movement. You can't get anywhere with them? The problem is you can't get anywhere associating yourself with the baggage of right-wing politics. So you have to take a middle ground. However, now it seems to me that the movement has thus become progressive. It's in the sense that not even progressive politically, but it's become progressive in its mindset. Every movement like this is inherently progressive in their temperament. But now you've come to a point where you're trying to emphasize a progressive liberal agenda. You have essentially bought into the larger argument that's existed within Western civilization since the Renaissance, that social change and social progress are an inherent good, an inherent and intrinsic good, and therefore you want to move forward to a kind of utopian society where you can have the kind of egalitarian world that everybody presumably wants to live in. The problem is that it's inherently unrealistic, and it leads to frustration. And much of the frustration, I think, that is at the core of Western society is this. It's this. It's that we, since the Renaissance, since the Enlightenment, and probably even going back to Jesus Christ, we have bought into the idea that social change and social progress are inherent and intrinsic goods, that they are the natural order of things, and that if we just go along with that, we will always become better. The problem is, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's utopian. It's idealistic. And when you adopt this mindset, there's really never any sort of conclusion. For example, when we look at the history of classical liberalism, when we look at the revolutions of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, when we look at these revolutions, they promised us a lot of stuff. They promised a lot of positive things. They promised us, voting rights, all these different things. But from the very beginning, it was always maybe a section of the society that could have that. It was always the bourgeois. It was always the middle class. It was always, white property owning, older white property owning, people own property that could vote, And we had this problem. And then from there, when, I hate to use this Marxist term, but the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, quote unquote, started making a lot of money, started becoming very wealthy. They left a lot of people out. A lot of people left out. And then from there, a lot of people who are still classically liberal at their core, they realized that the old classical liberals lied to them. So they created socialism. That's where socialism comes from. It's not something that's disconnected from classical liberalism. It comes from classical liberalism. It's out of classical liberalism that Karl Marx and a lot of those thinkers came from. They were just the most radical extreme of that. And they were the ones who said, well, all the other people, they were basically self-serving. They didn't really want freedom. We want to really make a real free society. But it all subscribes to the same basic idea, which we become conditioned to believe in our society, that social progress and social change are inherent goods. Therefore, there's nobody who can argue against that in a meaningful way. Even those who are conservative adopt this idea that it's an inherent good. And therefore, conservatives themselves try to become hip and trendy and become a part of that rather than standing on their own principles or what they actually believe. Therefore, nobody makes an intellectual argument for tradition. Tradition is seen as oppressive. A society such as our own is inherently anti-traditional and anti-conservative from the get-go, and it even occurs within right-wing politics, which is supposed to be conservative and traditional, typically or historically. Now, as I've said this, I can hear people coming in and saying that this or that or the other thing is all those things were inherently oppressive and negative and whatnot. And that's the problem. That's the problem. The history of socialism, how socialism emerged, shows exactly what I'm talking about. The history of revolution tells you what I'm saying. You have a society. It's bad. People get a little bit frustrated. They believe in some ideology. That ideology promises them the word. The revolution occurs. Now they live in that society. But the society itself proves itself to be less than perfect. People could become disillusioned. They create another ideology. Then they have another revolution. Then they become disillusioned. And it goes on and on and on and on. There's never any solution. There's no end in sight. You're forever trying to find whatever it is, and you're never happy. You're never content, and it never works. And we can see how this works in our own society. We don't have little pockets of revolution here and there, but we have reform. If we don't adopt revolution, we adopt the ideology of reform or reformism, whatever you want to call it. And when you look at, say, the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, all these different movements, the movements start out with very lofty goals, very, very noble goals in a lot of ways. But from there, they become organized. They become politically active. They argue for what they want, and they become successful. But then, after they become successful, they become redundant. See, this is the thing. If feminism was ever successful in its goals, it would become null and void. It would wipe itself out of existence. If the civil rights movement became successful, it would wipe itself out of existence. If the labor movement, it would wipe itself. It would become null and void. It would become redundant. There would be no need for it after a while if they were successful. Therefore, they have to perpetuate a bunch of problems. Therefore, if after they become organized and they've formed organizations based on these ideas, they then have to come up with more reasons. Therefore, it's a never-ending war. The search for I think it was Angry Harry who said in a Man-Woman Myth video that I think it was in the Man-Woman Myth video, could have been on his website. That the search for equality is a never-ending war. It's a never-ending war. There's no solution in sight. It goes on and on and on and on and on. There's no end. It's literally a never-ending war. And unlike, someone like, say, Angry Harry, who is a conservative libertarian, a classical liberal, I'm not a classical liberal. I actually reject classical liberalism. I subscribe to a brand of conservatism that doesn't exist anymore in our society, that we don't have anymore. It's a complete and total rejection of all that stuff. The whole concept of it at its core, I reject. Because I see it as something that we've adopted in Western society that is intrinsic to the culture of Western society, which leads us to the sad lot that we have today. And the reason why our civilization is falling apart, the reason why we can't seem to fix our problems in America, in Europe, wherever, is because we consistently believe that everything is supposed to go forward, and we never think for 5 minutes that maybe going forward into something we don't know will lead to more problems. And that's it. Liberalism at its core is a never-ending war, and it leads to nothing but problems. Because there's no solution to human flaws. Humans are inherently and intrinsically flawed at our core, and there are no easy solutions to any of the problems of human nature. None. Therefore, the best thing we can ever hope for is some sort of arrangement that makes people reasonably happy with the outcome of the situation. That means that if people are reasonably happy with their lives, that's the best we can hope for, ever. Now, what does all of this have to do with the men's rights movement? Well, if the men's rights movement was ever successful, it would have to at some point figure out some way to perpetuate itself. If it became organized and it started advocating and its end results were successful, and all of a sudden people accepted the ideas of the movement in a more mainstream way, which is beginning to happen a little bit, it seems, they would have to come up with some reason to perpetuate itself. There's never going to be the utopia that we all want. Men and women are never really ever going to be equal in any meaningful way, because there's just first of all, there's way too much baggage. Over the last several years, with feminism, there's just way too much baggage there. On both sides. There's always going to be, and I think on some level, cognitively, and not saying that one is more intelligent than the other, because you always get accused of that if you even say this. But men and women, in my view, see the world in a fundamentally different way. And you're almost never going to get past it. You almost can't have a conversation Because I've had conversations with my mother, my own mother, and I've tried to discuss some of these issues, men's issues, and you just don't get anywhere. My mother subscribes. My mother's a very, very conservative and traditional person. She's actually probably, what she was arguing to me, for example, was just very much like the traditional women's rights activists were arguing. And it's ironic because you would think traditional women would actually be sympathetic to men, you know? Not sympathetic at all. They're almost as misandric as the feminists, only with a slightly different temperament. Now, that's the problem. That's really the problem that we have, as I see it. Therefore, my diagnosis, my solution to the problem is fundamentally different. And my solution is, if we want to fix the problems of Western society, of our society, we need to reject social progress. We need to reject social change as an inherent and intrinsic good. We need to reject liberalism at its core, root and branch, reject it, uproot it as a concept and an idea, in all of its forms, modern, classical, whatever. We need to we need to rediscover a more traditional society. We need to go back into history, go back even before Christianity, to find what it was in our society that worked, what works within our own nature, and we need to start trying to go with that. And we need to also really just go with practical solutions. My solutions may not even be practical, but we need to go back to practical solutions. We need to, need to accept that, there are certain things about men and women that are different. We need to appreciate our various differences, and we need to create a society which the worst traits of people do not manifest themselves. It can be argued, for example, that humans are not inherently altruistic, but we need to create some kind of arrangement where people are encouraged to be the most altruistic they can be within the context they are given. And therefore, we need to have a society in which people, but particularly men, have an investment in that society, where they see the good of the society, or they see the preservation of the society, of the community, with their own lot. That is, if we think about, I remember I came across a video by Richard Dawkins, for example, which discussed the selfish gene. And he said that the selfish gene encourages altruistic individuals. And I'm not going to go into the details of the science of it. But if we think about, for example, the selfish individual, which classical liberalism is always saying we're just inherently selfish and self-interested, which I don't really believe, I don't really believe it's that we're like that. Exactly. But if we think of the selfish individual as being part of a community, we must think that the selfish individual is like, say, the selfish gene, in the sense that he sees his own situation, he associates his own preservation with the preservation of the community, encouraging him to be altruistic. That's the society that we want to live in. That's the society that I know I personally would rather live in than the kind of society that we have. And therefore, my diagnosis and the way in which I reassess, or way I assess these types of movements, the men's rights movement included, is this. We will never be able to have the utopia of equality and goodness and happiness and fairness that we want. The thing about the universe, about existence, is that it's inherently brutal, short, harsh, and negative. We want our utopia because on some levels in our psyche, we want to live and we want to survive. And if we are told that, as human beings, if we are told that we can get that without all of that other nasty stuff, we think it will happen. We don't like the truth. And we want to believe that we all will be able to live. But the truth is, all of us will probably not be able to live. And therefore, we have to be practical about how we go about organizing our society, the kind of ideas we choose to embrace. And therefore, we have to be practical and realistic and make only sober assessments about the world we live in. And therefore, we cannot say, for example, that men will be able to, men need to be liberated and free too, alongside women. It's just not going to work. We can make an argument that in the future we can do this or that. For example, we live in the world we have now, so therefore we have to work within, the situation we're given. But saying, for example, that men and women, can be free and equal just doesn't work. For example, especially with men and women, one person's, for example, a man, let me just say it like this. For example, a man's freedom to have sex with a woman, to sleep around, for example, means that he would have to, if he got her pregnant, for example, if he was truly free, he wouldn't be held accountable to that, which is what we do. We actually hold men accountable, as many people have pointed out. But that freedom means that he has to burden her with the baby. And historically, we've always recognized in our society that this burden put on women means that a burden of responsibility has to be put on men. That to me is a fair situation, but it's not fair when the woman has the freedom to burden the man and the man has no recourse at all. Therefore, it's inherently unfair. But this is another conundrum that we have in our situation. And this leads me to conclude that neither one should have that freedom. Both of them should have that responsibility. And this is why the family is important. This is why marriage is important. If people are going to have children, if they're going to have sex, they need to be responsible with it. But how do you make them responsible? You can't have both freedom and responsibility. As far as I'm concerned, freedom and responsibility are two separate concepts. People should be relatively free. They should be free without coercion and without violence. But they can't be free from responsibility. But then when you say that, you say, well, they have personal responsibility. It's a fundamental contradiction as I see it. And this is the conundrum that I find myself in when I think about these things. Therefore, what's the solution? The solution is to reject the whole concept altogether. Root and branch. I say reject the whole damn thing, root and branch. And let's go back to some pre-classical liberal conception of responsibility and duty. I say that. And I say that as someone who's in my 20s. Therefore, I've lived in a thoroughly liberal society, and I've seen in my own personal life how it all works. I've seen that on some level you can't encourage people. You can't say to people, have freedom, and then say also be responsible. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. The truth of the matter is, as human beings, we are social animals. Therefore, as social animals and social beings, we must live together, and therefore our existence is inherently collectivist. And while I believe there needs to be a balance between the individual and the collective, between the individual and society, there needs to be a healthy balance. There always needs to be a healthy balance, which we've lost. The concept of it we've actually lost in our society. In order to do that, we must reject our traditional idea that the individual is at the center of society without any kind of duty at all. We must, on some level, we need to sit down, we need to think about what has worked in the past, what has not worked. And we need to go with what has worked in the past and reject what has not worked. And what has clearly not worked to me is liberalism, is the whole of liberalism. And the current men's rights movement, developing this men's human rights movement concept, is an example of a strand of our culture, an idea from our culture which has proven itself not to work time and time again, and therefore I can say that I can only speak for myself really, I can say that for myself, I'll try to do my part, to make people aware of, the issues that are important, and I believe that the movement is a good and positive, pragmatically, that it works for now, that the men going their own way is a good pragmatic solution. But as far as how all of this concerns men and women, men and women are different in many different ways. But whereas women, I think, have the luxury to complain, to feel frustrated, men don't have that luxury. Society is on some level based on the concept of men being disposable. Therefore, men, particularly, have to have some investment in this society. And what we need to do is we need to go back to trying to ensure that men feel an investment in their society. We need to go back to a society in which men feel that they see the society as offering them something. And that to me is probably the main problem. Therefore, if I was a member of the men's rights movement, that is, if I was a member of it in a position of responsibility and power of some kind, what I would say is we need to go back to this. We need to figure out a way to make men feel like they're invested in their society. And this means effectively that what I would be subscribing to would be a more conservative position. It would mean making men responsible for their families again, making men feel like they can take care of their families and that they have an inherent and important role within the family unit. It means fixing marriage. It means fixing going back to a society that was more traditional. It means, and as such, it would mean the end of it would make the men's rights movement in its current form redundant. It would make the men's rights movement just completely redundant, because it wouldn't be a liberation movement. It would be a conservative movement, and by extension, I guess at the end of the day, it wouldn't be conservative, would it? But that's how I see it, and therefore, in reassessing the men's rights movement, I come to that conclusion, and there's really nothing else I have to say. I think the proof is in the pudding, and I think one thing I will say though is that if the current men's human rights movement believes that they are going to be successful, one thing that needs to be considered is that tagging human, the H, onto that name is not going to change anything. For one, your political enemies will say, what, men are the only human beings? What, it's a men's hate rights movement now? Fundamentally, you're never going to convince your political enemies, the left, feminists, whoever, that you have any It just doesn't work. You're never going to convince them not to see you as an oppressor. Therefore, don't engage them on it. Don't even bother trying to fuel the fire. This is something that right-wing and conservative, I'm not going to say right-wing exactly, but conservative movements have done for a very long time. They modify their views. They kind of try to make themselves sound trendy. The point is to reject the trend and to simply say, at the end of the day, that this is the way things are and this is the way things have to be, and there's really nothing else you can do. There's no other practical solutions. Our society is at stake. Our society is crumbling around us. Therefore, are we going to fix those problems? Are we going to try to figure out what worked and what hadn't worked, reject what hadn't worked and go what worked, or are we going to continue to go down the same path we always have? And this is probably what I'm probably going to dedicate my time to in my future videos. It just trying to unravel how I personally think we got here, which is just the embracing of liberalism, and of liberalism at its core. Liberalism as an attitude, even. So, anyway, that's pretty much all I gotta say. And I kind of went on for a while, It's another long video I made, but I hope people, I hope people think about, I hope people, I only have 4 subscribers. I hope people see this video and watch it. Maybe think about what I've said. But I think it's an important topic to think about, in this context, because I don't think anybody has really come out or really has the balls, honestly, to come out and to say that the real problem is the fact that we keep trying to move forward at a fast pace, and we seem to be a group of people, Westerners, who seem to think progress is such a great thing that we never see how it seems to unravel our society, I believe, honestly, that society without some level of continuity with the past, some sort of traditional mechanism, and some mechanism just in general to ensure that people haven't feel an investment in their society. I think that society will always fail. That society will always fall apart. We as a society, we as people don't feel like we have any investment in our society. We feel like we can live solely for ourselves, and it always leads to failure. Society will always fall apart. And all of this relates back to the men's rights movement, because at its core, how it's currently emerged, how it's coming to be, at least is how I see it, is just the same damn thing. So, anyway, that's all I pretty much have to say, and as with all my videos, this is just another rant, so, I don't expect it to be perfect, but I hope everybody is able to see it, and that's it. I'll talk to you later. Bye.